How long did they stand there? Both as it were, caught in that circle of unearthly light, understanding each other perfectly, creatures of another world. They considered themselves as creatures of another world, and they were wondering what they were to do in this one world, with all this blissful treasure that burnt in their bosom. The blissful treasure is actually indicating towards the feeling. The feeling is being incorporated. The blissful treasure that burned in their bosoms and dropped in silver flowers. So the treasure, the feeling, the temperament, the emotion, it has been dropped in the flowers from their hairs and hands. So you think, each and every moment you will find that one particular emotion of a human being is being articulated in terms of something taken from nature. The nature is always taking part in their actions, it seems to be. Forever, for a moment. And did Miss Fulton murmur, yes, just that? Or did Bertha dream it? Was it a kind of a positive reciprocation that had been made? Was it a kind of, a kind of positive reinforcement that had been provided by her? Or it was merely a kind of dream, to be specific? Then the light was snapped on, and Face made the coffee. And Harry said, it's a romance and realism, the thrashing. My dear Mrs. Knight, don't ask me about my baby. I never see her. I shall not feel the slightest interest in her until she has a lover. And Mugg took his eye out of the conservatory for a moment and then put it under glass again. And Eddie Warren drank his coffee and set down the cup with a face of anguish, as though he had drunk and seen the spider. So these are the casual, meaningless actions and being incorporated there. What I want to do is to give the young men a show. I believe London is simply teeming with first chop unwritten plays. Again, the conversation is going on with the theater and theatrical performances, as you can see. What I want to say to them is, here is the theater far ahead. You know, my dear, I am going to decorate a room for the Jacob Nathans. Oh, I am so tempted to do a fried fish scheme, with the backs of the chairs shaped like frying pans and lovely cheap potatoes embroidered all over the curtains. So everywhere you can find a kind of different kinds of words have been taken in considerations. The casual words are there. When they are actually talking about the theater and theatrical performances, decorations, the patterns of play to be described, the world of Bertha Young is completely different to that. They continue, the trouble with our young writing men is that they are still too romantic. That means they are not to be associated with such kind of romanticism, you see. That's why they are associated in terms of the realistic drama. You can't put out to sea without being seasick and wanting a basin. Well, why won't they have to have the courage of those basins? Why? What is the kind of thing they are actually ascribing to? That the romantic portraitures of portrayals of characters within the plays, within the dramas, that must have to be stopped. They are with the fact, they are the factual persons. They are fact-loving persons rather. They are always with the view that some society has to be portrayed, the typical plays, kitchen sink plays or something like that, where everything should have to be exposed. The negative terms, the negative words, the negative feelings and temperaments. Such a kind of description must have to be there. But if you think about the lady, Bertha Young, it is something different. So that's why the reference to the basins. Why basins? Because somebody, when a person is seasick, he must have to be vomit. So that's why the basin is needed. And it is very problematic at the time to And he says that why won't they have the courage of those basins? A dreadful poem about a girl who was violated by a beggar without a nose in a little wood. So that is a kind of a word that is being associated with some physicalities and some violence and some kind of lust, lust, and different kinds of attributes being given. Miss Fulton, again, the dots actually pointed out that it is a kind of a disjointed narrative. And then Miss Fulton sank into the lowest, deepest chair, and Harry handed round the cigarettes. From the way he stood in front of her, shaking the silver box and saying abruptly, a box was there, and within this particular box, he says Egyptian, Turkish, Virginian, they're all mixed up. Bertha realized that she not only bored him, he really disliked her. And she decided from the way Miss Fulton said, no, thank you, I won't smoke. So here you will find that Egyptian, Turkish, Virginian, these are probably different kinds of cigars. And Miss Fulton replies, no, thank you, I won't smoke. That she felt it too and was hurt. Oh, Harry, don't dislike her. You are quite wrong about her. She is wonderful, wonderful. And besides, how can you feel so differently about someone who means so much to me? That means I like the lady too much. And don't feel so differently. And besides, how can you feel so differently about someone who means so much to me? I shall try to tell you when we are in bed tonight what has been happening. So that bed is very important here, because at the very moment you will find in the next lines, somehow the first craving for physical union is being incorporated in the very next lines. So here she says that I shall try to tell you when we are in bed tonight that has been happening, or what has been happening, what she and I have shared. At those last words, something strange and almost terrifying darted into Bertha's mind. And this something blind and something whispered to her, soon these people will go, the house will be quiet, the lights will be out, and you and he will be alone together in the dark room, the warm bed, and etc. So these are actually indicating towards the sexual consummation. But fundamentally, you will find now from here a particular question actually arises, that is it indicating that this Bertha Young is a bisexual? Now the point is what the gender critics actually pointed out. This particular reference to the physical union between Bertha and Harry, why such a kind of feeling, such a kind of, emotion is being molding up at this moment? Why? What is the reason? Probably they have pointed out that ultimately now Bertha at this very moment with Miss Fulton in her full view, Bertha probably thought about the physical union between these two. That means Bertha and Miss Fulton. Now the society doesn't permit it, and everything has to be shattered in this way. Everything has to be repressed. Such a kind of a repression, it actually changes the temperament of the lady, and she finds Harry to be the next person. The relationship, the physical relationship, the sexual relationship between Bertha and Harry had not been very good, as we have already been informed by the speaker, by the narrator here. But here at this very moment, certainly the temperament got changed. The probable reason is when your sex concern, the primary sex object, has been transferred from Miss Fulton and it has been vested on Harry. So Harry actually supplements Miss Fulton here. That is the actual thing that is being incorporated or pointed out by the critics. So therefore, she writes, she jumped up from her chair and ran over to the piano. What a pity someone doesn't play, she cried. What a pity somebody doesn't play. For the first time in her life, Bertha Young desired her husband. For the first time, remember, when Miss Fulton is present. Oh, she had loved him. She had been in love with him, of course, in every other way, but just not in that way. This that way is actually indicating towards the physical way, obviously. And equally, of course, she had understood that he was different. They had discussed it so often regarding their sexual habits and something. It had worried her dreadfully at first to find that she was so cold, but after a time it had not seemed to matter. They were so frank with each other, such good pals, friends, remember, that was the best of being modern. But now, ardently, ardently, the word ached in her ardent body. Was this what that feeling of bliss had been leading up to? So, such a bliss is leading up to such a kind of physical union. But then, my dear, said Mrs. Norman Knight, you know our shame. We are the victims of time and train. So now it's the time to wind up the session. We live in Hampstead. It's been so nice. And Bertha said, I will come with you into the hall. I loved having you, but you must not miss the last train. No, that's not so awful, isn't it? Have a whiskey tonight before you go, called Harry. No thanks, old chap. And Bertha squeezed his hand for that as she shook it. Good night, goodbye, she cried from the top step, feeling that this self of hers was taking leave of them forever. So, a different kind of self is leaving from them forever. Now, it would be, it's again indicating towards a kind of a change, a kind of transformation that is actually happening within the character of this woman. When she got back into the drawing room, the others were on the move. Then some few lines of a broken line has been incorporated. Then you can come part of the way in my taxi. I shall be so thankful not to have to face another drive alone after my dreadful experience. So it was actually indicating towards the first lines, first experience that she had. You can get a taxi at the rank just at the end of the street. You won't have to walk more than a few years. Oh, that's a comfort. I will go and put on my coat. Miss Fulton moved towards the hall, and Bertha was following when Harry almost pushed past. So Bertha was going to the hall, but Harry moved there. Let me help you. Bertha knew that he was repenting his rudeness. His actions has been interpreted by Bertha as if he was repenting his rudeness. She let him go. What a boy he was in some ways, so impulsive, so simple, Bertha thought. And Eddie and she were left by the fire. There was nobody else. And then again some casual words, exchange of words were there. I wonder if you have been Bilk's new poem called Table d'Hôte, said Eddie softly. It's so wonderful. In the last anthology, have you got a copy? I'd so like to show it to you. It begins with an incredibly beautiful line. Why must it always be tomato soup? Oh yes, said Bertha. And she moved noiselessly to a table opposite the drawing room door, and Eddie glided noiselessly after her. She picked up the little book and gave it to him. They had not made a sound. Now the important section, very important section actually. While he looked it up, she turned her head towards the hall, and she saw Harry with Miss Fulton's coat in his arms, and Miss Fulton with her back turned to him and her head bent. He tossed the coat away, put his hands on her shoulders, and turned her violently to him. His lips said, I adore you. And Miss Fulton laid her moonbeam fingers on his cheeks and smiled her sleepy smile. Harry's nostrils quivered, his lips curled back in a hideous grin, while he whispered, tomorrow. And with her eyelids, Miss Fulton said, yes. So they are preparing for a secret meeting, and somehow this particular episode, it throws a big stone on the face of the imaginations of Bertha Young that is being indicated. Here it is, said Eddie. Why must it always be tomato soup? Now, the casual words are continuing. It is so sleepy, true. It's deeply true. Don't you feel? Tomato soup is so dreadfully eternal. If you prefer, said Harry's voice, very loud from the hall, I can phone you a cab to come to the door. Now it's something publicly being made, these words. Oh no, it's not necessary, said Miss Fulton. And she came up to Bertha and gave her the slender fingers to hold. Goodbye, thank you so much. Goodbye, said Bertha. Miss Fulton held her hand a moment longer. Your lovely pear tree, she murmured, and then she was gone, with Eddie following, like the black cat following the grey cat. This particular image has been incorporated at the very beginning, as we have already found. I will shut up shop, said Harry, extravagantly cool and collected. Your lovely pear tree, pear tree, pear tree. And Bertha simply ran over to the long windows and she cried this very significant line, what is going to happen now? Erpor ki hobe? Uncertainty, you see. But the pear tree, it remains, it was as lovely as ever and as full of flower as steel. So it doesn't change in spite of divergent forms, in spite of different kinds of problems, but the pear tree remains in its own pace.